Once you got the signal flow down, you can pretty much do this for any device, any DAW, it doesn't matter because the principles always stay the same. But if you don't know the principles, that's where you fall. You gotta have the basics of this down. When it comes to audio, basic audio principles, the DAW doesn't matter, especially when we're talking about things like signal flow. Signal flow is one of the most basic of basic audio principles that you can possibly deal with. And to me, it is the crux of whether you're going to be able to excel or not. I've seen many people, and I've had one or two instances myself, that go down in flames all because they don't understand signal flow at its most basic concept. Because of course we know with newer digital consoles and newer interfaces and all these things, it can get pretty complicated really fast. However, if you understand the basic principles, then usually you're not going to be stumped. And when I say stumped, like completely out, like you have no clue what's going on, you can't figure it out, and at that point you're done. Take an analog mixer. You have inputs and you have outputs. Let's just start right there. On the back of the console, you'll have a microphone or a line input. That's where you plug your signal into, right? So here we go. You got a mixer here. This channel right here, you have this mic input. You have mic input and you have a line input. Every mixer is going to at least have one of these or both of these. You plug your signal into this. Cool. Channel 1. We just plug the mic in. All right, no problem. From here, signal flows down through this console and works its way down through this EQ section, this auxiliary section, and then down to the fader. So we got that. We plug the signal in, it comes in, and it gets down to the fader. Now from here, this fader is then routed to the master mix left and right output. Now, depending on the console, you might have to press something to make that happen. Like there might be assignment switches here. Like if we go to the Mackie VLZ 1604. So you see here on this board, these buttons right here, these are your assignment buttons. So the very first one is your solo, and then you have 1, 2, 3, 4, and then LR, which is left and right main mix. So what that means is when you plug the signal into this console, cool, you go into channel 1, it flows all the way down, goes through the mic pre, hits the EQ, all that good stuff, it gets to the fader. Now, here at this fader, you have to then say where you want that signal to go to. So if you press 1 and 2, that's gonna send it right here to these two faders right here, this 1 and 2 channels. If you hit left and right, that's gonna send it to the main mix. So boom, that's our basic audio principles of how audio is going to flow through a console. So now let's go to an audio interface. The Apollo Twin, here we go. You have a mic line input like we just talked about on the console. So there's your signal going in to the Apollo. From there, signal can either go out of these left and right monitor outputs, line output 3 and 4, or in this case, if we're connecting it to a computer, this Thunderbolt output is what goes to the computer. And don't get hung up on the Thunderbolt. It could be USB, it could be Firewire if you still got Firewire interfaces, it could be Dante, like whatever. The output that connects this to the computer, that's where the signal's going. Now, being an audio interface, when you plug this into the computer and you go into your DAW, you have your inputs and your outputs. And depending on the DAW, how you set that up, that's pretty much the same. You got ins and you have outs. Because the interface has 2 physical inputs, when you see input 1 and 2, that means input 1 and 2 on the interface. When you see output 3 and 4, it means line output 3 and 4 here on the interface. That's just the basic, simple how it works. So here we go. So let's say you're not using the built-in mic pre on this Apollo. Let's say you have a Warm Audio 73. So instead of going into the mic input here, I am now going to take my microphone and I'm going to plug that microphone into this Warm Audio 73. So now my mic signal goes into the Warm Audio preamp. Cool. All right. Now, if this is the only piece of gear I had, then I would take the output, which is the female connector, and then I would then plug that as a line output into the input on here. Now, a note about mic in line. Depending on the interface, typically, if you plug in a XLR, standard microphone XLR cable, if you plug this into the interface, it is a mic signal. A lot of interfaces register that way. They just automatically, if you plug in a mic signal, it sees it as a mic signal. Cool. The line input, this jack looks a little bit different than maybe some jacks you've seen before. This is what they call a combo jack, and it has the ability to take an XLR or a 1/4 inch. Now that 1/4 inch needs to be a TRS cable, which is for tip ring sleeve. So that's the one that has the 2 lines on it, not the single line that you would use for instrument cable, like a guitar or bass. You don't want that cable. You want a TRS cable, very specific, because that is a balance cable. The only difference between this and the TRS cable is literally the connector. They are exactly the same. The mic cable has 1, 2, 3 prongs on it. The TRS cable has tip ring sleeve. It's the same thing. So cool, we got that down. You plug that into the interface. Then you would go into your software and you would say, in this instance for Apollo stuff, the console is how you control their interface, but you could do this on the front of the interface. You would take it from saying mic signal to being line signal, because by plugging in an external mic preamp, you're no longer needing to utilize the mic pre on the Apollo. You now want to utilize the signal from your 73 that we were just talking about. So now you've come line out of your 73 and gone line into your Apollo, and you're going to tell the Apollo to be on line as the input. As it's usually just a button. This right here is what we're talking about. When you plug in that 1/4 inch cable to the Apollo, you need to go up here, and instead of it saying mic, it needs to then say line. And what happens when you go to line is this whole input gain knob is going to go away, because you're no longer dealing with a mic signal. You're dealing with a line level signal. Cool. So we got that plugged in. Now, let's say, oh, wait a minute, Dale, I have a WA73 and I have a WA1B compressor. Okay, cool. So now we want to insert that compressor into the recording chain. With the Warm Audio 73, you actually have a couple ways to do that. If you notice here on the front of this unit, it has a few buttons. One of these buttons is an insert. So an insert is when you take signal from a unit, so in this case, a microphone preamp, and you want to interject into that signal something else. So in this case, we want to put in a compressor. So what happens when you go to the back of this unit is you see you have insert send and you have insert return. So now this is where you get into those cables that you see is a Y cable, or also known as an insert cable. This is an insert cable. See, again, TRS. There's our TRS signal. That would be what goes on the device. So if we go back to that console we was looking at, so right there where it has an insert, this is where this cable would go, because you would plug this into the insert, and then one of these cables is the insert into the device, and then the other one is the return from the device coming back into it. So you got one that's going out and another one that's coming back in. So that's how an insert cable would work. Now on the back of the WA, we see the same thing. We see insert send, insert return. So in this case, what you would do if you wanted to utilize the insert, you would take your insert cable, you would plug the input side into the insert send, and then the output side into the insert return. And most of these are going to be labeled to let you know which side is which. So come insert send, insert return out of here, and then you will be going into input, output. So that's the same thing. Again, XLR or TRS, doesn't matter. They're the same thing. It's a matter of what connection you have. So that's your insert and in. So you would come into this unit and then you would come out of this unit. And so in this case, you wouldn't even need to use this kind of cable. In this sense, you would more likely be utilizing straight connections. Like you could just use a TRS coming out of the pre, come out of this, insert send, go into the WA1B, and then out of the WA1B back into this return. So, and that, again, that would allow you to utilize the insert switch on the warm audio, which is a cool way to connect these. A lot of people do that. They use it just right straight up, plugged in, and they utilize the insert switch, and then they can take it in and out of that unit as they please. The other way you could do this, same thing, is you could just connect them in serial. So you could just say, all right, I want to go to the WA1B. I want to bypass the whole insert thing. I just want to go straight out of here and then go into the WA1B. And then you would take your output of the WA1B, and here we go, right back to the line input of the Apollo or whatever interface we're using. So again, it's the same thing. Doesn't matter what the devices are, the signal flow still stayed the same. If I was using an external mic pre, I plug my microphone into the 73, and then I come out of the 73 into the line input of the Apollo. If I wanted to then put a compressor into that chain, I could just say, all right, instead of that output coming from the 73 to the Apollo, I'm going to now take that cable that I plugged into the Apollo, and I'm going to take it from there, and I'm going to transfer it to the 1B, and then I'm going to get another cable and come out of the 1B and go into the line put of the twin. Cool. That's a recording setup. That would be if we were tracking through external preamp, external compressor, getting into our audio interface. That is how you would do this. Now, here is where some people completely lose their routing, is when they start wanting to look into using hardware and mixing. So in this case, we want to take the WA1B that we've been tracking through, but now we want to use it in a mixing standpoint. In our current setup, it won't work as is because right now we have it set up to where the microphone goes into the 73, 73 comes out to the WA1B, and then out of the 1B into our Apollo. So in that scenario, I can't utilize the WA1B compressor to mix because right now the signal that's going into that compressor comes from my preamp. So we got to get signal out of our DAW into the compressor. So you're going to have to rewire. There's no way to keep that current wiring and then flip this to use it as a mixing. It just doesn't work that way. The signal flow has to work. You have to put the wires where the wires go. So if you wanted to flip into mixing mode, you would then say, all right, cool. I want to come out of my DAW. And in that case, you would need to use a line output from your audio interface. So on the twin, we would go say line output 3. And depending on the DAW, the nomenclature for this is going to be different. In Pro Tools, it's called a hardware insert. In Logic, I believe it's called a IO plugin. Not sure what it's called in anything else, but it's the same thing. It's some way to insert hardware as a plugin or an insert slot in your DAW. So however you set that up in your DAW, you just need to look that up, and I promise you, you'll find the details for how to do that part of it. So we're going to take the output, line output of the Apollo, and then we're going to take that and we're going to go into the input of the 1B, and then Now we got to get that signal back. Now in this setup, we already had the 1B connected to the line input on our Apollo. So depending on your DAW, you could leave that connection the same. Like you could keep it as the output of your 1B goes into your interface as is. And in this case, again, we would stay on the line input on the Apollo, and then you would go in and set up the insert slot. All right, right here, you would literally go in here, pull up the IO utility, and you would set the output. So you would go in here, your interface is gonna pop up as a device, and you're gonna tell it what output you're using on your interface to get to your device. So in this case, we said we were using line out 3. So I would go on here and say line output 3 is what's going into my device. Remember, out to in, out to in. So out of line output 3 to my WA1B. And then this example, we had the WA1B connected to the line input 1 on our Apollo Twin. So we would go here and say the input is 1. In Logic, I want to say Studio One, other DAWs, that's fine. In Pro Tools, that wouldn't work because Pro Tools is a one-to-one routing for inserts, which means if I have my output 3 is where I'm connecting my hardware to, the input also has to be 3. So again, depending on the DAW is going to determine this particular step. But it's still, again, the signal flow didn't change. It's just a matter of how you do it. Now, going through our signal flow, we have our output 3 going into the WA1B, and then the output of the WA1B is going into the line input number 1 on our Apollo. Now, with that set up inside of Logic, you would be able to use the WA1B as a IO plugin, basically an insert on a track, and mix through that. That's the basic principles, and that's everything you need to know to get the WA1B set up as a plugin to use in mixing with Logic. So again, I just want to reiterate that your recording chain is one thing. The mixing chain is a completely different thing, and most often you're going to have to rewire things in order for it to work. And you would literally repeat this step over and over again for however many inputs and outputs you have and how many pieces of hardware you want to use. That is the most basic of routing audio and using hardware for mixing. This can get way more complicated. We can start talking about Patchbays and all that kind of stuff, but I just wanted to keep it very simple for this because I know this is something that a lot of people don't talk about. Even the manufacturers, a lot of product demos start from the premise that you already know the basic signal flow stuff, and they never really walk through this. So hopefully this video will become a resource for people. I want to make sure that everybody has this basic understanding of how to use these things, and the fact that most often you're going to have to rewire things. That's the key, is rewiring. As soon as you change what it is that you're doing, the wiring has to change. That's just how it is. There's no other way around that. You gotta change your wiring. If you're plugging a microphone into a preamp and then you're coming out of that preamp going to a compressor to record, then you say, I want to use my compressor for mixing. Well, you have to unplug the signal that's going into the compressor, which in this case would have been the external mic pre, and replace it with an output that's coming from the DAW. It's simple to me, but as soon as the person said that they couldn't get the routing, it was just like, that I get it. And it's literally because the routing that they currently have works as it works because they're recording most of the time. But as soon as they want to now take some of that hardware and use it for mixing, it's a disconnect of what that does. I will preach signal flow until Jesus come back, because to me it's the thing. If you get the signal flow, if you got that, everything else we can figure that out. We can figure all the other stuff out. Like, oh, it's going into this piece of hardware, it's doing that. Hey, that's all extra stuff. You walk into a studio, you see the patch bay and they got all the wires, blah blah blah. Like, hey, disregard all that. Just go back to, we plug the microphone into the input and that signal flows down through the EQ and it gets to the fader. From the fader, it's gonna go to the master output. I might have to hit a button to get it to do that, you know, to route it, but still, that's how the basic signal flow works. And then we start looking at the patch band. We say, okay, cool. I got an insert on channel 1 and I want to put in a compressor. Okay, cool. I'm gonna take the insert output and I'm gonna patch that into the compressor. Then I'm gonna come back from the compressor back into the channel. Or I might go straight into the input of my DAW. You see how quickly I was able to do that? It's because I understand the signal flow. The basic principles of signal flow is gotta go from one place to the other. I'm just following the wires. I'm literally just following the wires. And you can do the same thing in computers, man. Like for instance, if I pull up my interface. So this is my Red 4 Pre Focusrite RedNet interface. And the routing for this could be basic or it could be complicated. So here's my inputs. Literally, this is all the inputs. So you can see right here on the left-hand side, we see DAW, and then the inputs here, and then the Pro Tools side of it as well. And we have the exact same thing again on the outputs. So we have the physical outputs on the device, but then we have the output channel source. Something like this could throw you off if you don't have the basic principles of routing. But because we know now, we've gone through this, we got the basic principles of routing. If I plug a microphone into input number 1 on my interface and I want it to come out my monitors, I don't want it to go to Pro Tools, I just want it to come out my monitors. I know that my monitors are connected to line 3 and 4, which I would then say, cool, the channel source, what's feeding that line output, I want to be hardware input analog 1. You see that? That's literally how I did it, because I'm following the signal flow. I want it to come out of line output 3. So what is feeding line output 3? Cool. All right, let me go in here and put it. And I can literally go in and reroute anything I want to do. I can do that because I understand the basics. Please, 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 please. Just internalize the basic signal flow. This is going to help you so much on your audio journey. I don't care if it's in the studio or live. It doesn't matter. Signal flow is always the signal flow. That never changes. If anything else changes in audio, that's the one thing that will remain the same. For all my church folks, one thing, you know song. But that's never going to change. It's literally always going to be, you have a source, it needs to go into something and then out. That's it. In, out. Now, once it's in, you might be able to take it and put other things in there, insert it, reroute it this place and take it over here, but it's still got to get in and it's got to get out. And if you don't believe me, you can literally walk up to any mixing console, any interface, and you could do these exercises. You could literally take a microphone, a guitar, plug it in, you see the signal pop in, and you say, okay, cool, what if I wanted to insert a compressor? Then you say, okay, cool, whatever you got to do to route that on that particular device, you route it, and you literally watch the signal go in and out. One of the things I do a lot of times, we know in sessions, troubleshooting is part of the job of audio engineering. So if I plug something in that should work, but it's not working, so for instance, I'm not hearing it, I'm not getting signal from it, my default is always to go back to basic signal flow and look for the signal. So if I know I got a microphone in the booth here and I plugged it into, let's say 7. Okay, cool. I plugged the microphone into 7. From there, I'm gonna start and I'm gonna say, okay, cool. Let me go to my interface, if it's plugged into my interface, and I'm gonna go to 7, and I'm gonna look to see if I see the signal there. If I don't see the signal there, I immediately know, that something's wrong with the input, because if I plugged it into 7, it should be at 7. That's the basics of that routing. It doesn't matter if I wanted to go through a compressor or EQ or any of that. It doesn't matter. None of that part matters. The part that matters is that I don't even have signal getting in from that device. So from that point on, I got to go all the way back to the source and figure out what's going on with the source. And in that situation, it could have been as simple as, oh, the cable wasn't plugged all the way in, like it was hanging just slightly. And you plug it in, then boom, there pops up your signal. Now everything works. So always go into that. Don't go into a panic. Just go into signal flow. Follow your signal. Live example. Cool. We working with a digital console and it's plugged into a stage box. Okay, no problem. Go to the stage. All right, here's the kick drum. It's plugged into input number 3. Okay, no problem. This stage box is stage box X. All right, cool. Then we go to the console. Stage box X is set up. Oh, wait a minute. Stage box X is not the first set of inputs. So 3 is not 3. Now we got to do a little bit of math because, oh, they have 2 stage boxes here. So the first stage box maybe is 16 channels. So that's 1 through 16. X is the second stage box. So now it's 17, 18, 19. Oh, let me go on the console for my kick drum channel, make it 19. Boom, there's my signal. This stuff happens all the time, but the signal flow. It's always the signal flow. Every single time. I can't think of any situation I've ever been in that signal flow wasn't the thing. Like I've never been in a situation ever. It's always signal flow. Could it be a DAW signal flow thing? Possibly. If you're in Pro Tools and you're working with somebody template that you never worked with before, and they've got inserts and sends and all this kind of stuff going on, you might have to track that stuff down. But again, if you just go back to your basic principles of how you know stuff works, you just start breaking it down. You look at the channel, you say, okay, cool, I got the mic coming in on this input, then the output is going to this bus. Okay, cool, where's that bus? Now we start looking in the session, we find a track that has, okay, here's that track, here it is. Oh, there's a plugin on that track that's deactivated. No wonder I don't hear any signal, because that plugin is not allowing signal to pass through because it doesn't have activation. Cut the plugin off, what happens? Boom, there's signal every single time. Every single time. So I'm gonna hop off of here. I'll catch y'all in the next one. Peace.